now for the full homily. No, much more important talk about our parish and the beautiful life that we have here at St. John. And I know it's the end of the liturgy, so parents, if your kids are making noise or anxious, you can go into the back room if you'd like. You should still be able to hear the words that I have to say. So first of all, Kali Panagia.
Kali Panagia.
In these past few months, it's been a whirlwind for our parish. And for me personally, at times, so much has happened. So I wanted to take this time to pause and refocus our attention upon the important goal that is before us. This is like the State of the Union address for our community, but it won't be that long or boring. Hopefully not. As the spiritual shepherd of the parish, I am here to state our goal and to say it again and again so that we're all of one mind and one focus. And what is the goal? To make the new church property our spiritual home as soon as possible. To worship as a community at the new property which God Himself has handed into our possession. Why must we make this new property our spiritual home? Because it's God's will. He has given us this property so that He can have a dwelling place in this spiritual desert, a temple for the Most High God. There is here not a temple. This is a tent, and we do well to remember that. Now that God has given us the new property, I'm zealous and eager to start sanctifying the land through divine services, through liturgies, and all the services of the church. We need to worship there. How we accomplish this goal of making the new property our spiritual home, I don't know yet. There are a lot of good ideas, and I will not micromanage how this goal is accomplished, or I'll try not to micromanage. You all, as the St. John community, not just the building committee, need to determine how we will reach the goal. As for my part, I will continue to state the goal. We as a community need to be worshiping on the land which God has given us, making it into our spiritual home, which means that this property here becomes no longer our home. Now I know this is overwhelming and scary. Leaving our current home and moving to this new home, that's understandable, and it won't happen immediately by any means. It is a monumental task, but I have faith in you. God has placed each of you here and now. He knows your talents and gifts, which He has given to you. I have faith in you, and more importantly, I have faith in God. He will show us the path, He will illumine us, and continue to work what He has already been doing, which is the work of miracles. God has been working miracles, great and small, ever since this property appeared to us a year ago. God is showing us His providence and His plan for the Church of St. John the Baptist, and He has been confirming it with miracles. So let me tell you a few of these. First of all, the price and the timing of the property for sale. The search committee before this site came about was looking at properties that it was hoping would pay $1 million an acre, but probably more like $1.5 million per acre for our church that needed at least 3 acres. This is what we were looking at and expecting. And then this property came at the incredibly low price of $2.5 million for 6 acres. And this is only because of one thing, because the timing of when the sellers listed the property and the timing of when the city of Hillsborough makes these in lieu fees for the SNR, you don't need to know about all of that, that hasn't happened yet. As soon as the city sets those fees, this property, like every other property we've been looking at, will be $1 million an acre. God has made the timing perfect for us. The location of the property. What a blessing. We were looking all the way out to Forest Grove and Sherwood and Shoals Ferry and anywhere that we could look to find land that would be cheap enough. We were talking about outside the urban growth boundary. Do we do that? Do we not? This property is nowhere near the urban growth boundary. It's so close, less than 3 miles. And the fact that this is the big one, the fact that the property had already been zoned for a church, a school, and a cemetery. It already has that zoning. We have to get a conditional use permit, but this is an incredible blessing. All the properties that we were looking at, if they had 1 or 2 of those, we were lucky. The next miracle, the fact that the sellers liked us and wanted to work with us on a long time frame. They should have been looking for a 30 to 60 day close on a house, right? That's what you would be doing if you were selling your house. And we come in with a year, and they said yes. But of course, the miracle that we all know and we are all thankful to God for is the fact that along that journey, we were able to reduce the price by $1 million through the intercession of St. Minas. Please pray to St. Minas for us as we continue forward. If any of us had doubt, God proved his plan through this. And then the miracle of His Eminence's trip being planned months before all of this. But it lined up in timing with the blessing of the property and how he was inspired to make it into a groundbreaking. This is no small thing that we now have had the groundbreaking on our property. His divinely inspired words throughout our visit continue to strengthen and bolster us. And even the timing of all that corresponded was right with Lent. Did you notice that? It was right before we entered into Lent that the price reduction happened. It was right before Holy Week that we had the close of escrow. And it was right after Pascha and before Pentecost when the Metropolitan visited. It's been a whirlwind. And then there's the latest miracle. This is a small one, which is St. Anna's Church in Roseville is giving us their huge 1,500 square foot tent for free. So that will be, God willing, coming up to our property this week. Not that we can immediately set it up. We have to figure out what to do with it. But a 1,500 square foot tent. So many blessings from God. We must remember these miracles. We must remember these blessings when we get nervous and anxious and worried about everything that seems too insurmountable. With these miracles, God is pointing and guiding us along a path. He's telling us through signs and wonders that it is his will for us to purchase this property for his church, not so that we can have a property, but so that he can have a church. We're transforming the property at 1050 Northeast Walker Road into hallowed ground, a place that is dedicated and set aside as God's dwelling place, where his grace is in abundance. Our work of hallowing this ground begins now. We need to be worshiping in the property as a community, and it continues through construction and through the consecration of the Holy Temple. We're establishing a beacon of God's grace, his dwelling place, which will, for centuries to come, be a bastion and haven for the region, from the Willamette Valley to Washington State, from Portland all the way out to Seaside and Lincoln City. Because of the spiritual magnitude of this work, we are also entering into spiritual warfare of a far greater magnitude. This work is an affront to the enemy and his machinations. He does not want this to continue forward and to succeed. He wants to sow division between us and to cause us to falter, to slow down, to see the magnitude of the work and effort and the cost and become doubtful and apprehensive, to put on the brakes and wait for some future time. This is why we must remember the miracles wrought by God which have brought us to this moment in time. We must see God's decisive push forward, his revealing of his will through miraculous events. We're not alone. God is with us. He will guide us and miraculously provide for the sacred work until the day when we arrive at the church's consecration. A consecration is, after all, the baptizing of the church, if you will. It's a new creation, a set-aside, hallowed place where God uniquely dwells, a place where the relics of martyrs sanctify the holy gifts upon the holy altar. However, the sanctifying of our property begins now, long before the consecration of the temple. God has miraculously handed us this property, and it is now up to us to work towards its sanctification. Simply put, the property needs more and more prayer on it. We need to be having paracleses and liturgies and other services so that the physical place is imbued with God's grace and becomes a divine dwelling place on earth. As we look ahead to this new chapter in our St. John community, it's important also to look back at St. John's spiritual journey over the last 25 plus years. So to see this trajectory of our community, this singular trajectory, even though it's been comprised of different people at different times, and many of you are very new to our community, but God has called you. From the beginning, the goal was to become a true Orthodox church, a community of the faithful who build a God-pleasing temple to worship the Lord and attract weary souls, bringing them healing and wholeness. Over the years, there were many steps and a number of temporary homes for our community. We landed in the current temporary home almost 20 years ago, planning to stay here for only 5 to 7 years. Yet during all the years here at this property on Walker Road, God did not provide a path forward until now. This was God's timing. If you remember at the 25th anniversary celebration nearly 2 years ago, when His Eminence and Father Theodore, the founding priest, when they spoke, both of them stressed the importance of getting out of our current property and moving on to the church's final home. Now, nearly 2 years later, we've been led to the water's edge. We see the land behind us and the land that is in front of us. We might feel like the Israelites crossing the Red Sea, apprehensive to enter into the desert of this new property that lies ahead. It's a fearful thing, fearful if we do not see the providence of God in His guiding hand. But look at the miracles that have taken place. You see, we are not looking across the Red Sea from Egypt into the desert. In fact, we are looking across the Jordan River with the desert behind us and the promised land ahead. Eric, in his article in the newsletter, this is our new quarterly newsletter, he said this passage fittingly from the Old Testament. When the Israelites were about to cross the Jordan River and go into the promised land, there was one problem. The Jordan was at its flood stage, as was normal for that time of year. God told Joshua to have the priest carrying the ark step into the river. When he did, the river stopped, and we are told that the water piled up into a large wall. God told Joshua to have the leader of each tribe pick up a large rock as they crossed. On the other side, they stacked the stones. This is what Eric continues. This is his article. He says, this is what I want us to think about. God told Joshua that when your children and your children's children ask what these rocks are, you will tell them all the wondrous things the Lord our God performed on this day. Now I tell you, this whole thing of having the Petros appeal and the rocks with the cross on it had no thought to that passage. And yet now we have these rocks on the property that will remind us of the miracles that God has performed and continues to perform before us. We must leave the desert of this temporary home. Everything until now was about temporary church homes and temporary locations. Today we're looking at and walking upon the permanent home of St. John the Baptist just down the road. This is our Jerusalem, and this is where the tent becomes a temple, where St. John's Church will be erected and will stand for centuries. What I want to make very clear is that we are in a tent right now. I'm not talking about the fact that this current building is old, though it is, or falling apart, though it is, or needing a new roof, though it is, or crowded with people and cars, though it is. You can read Mark Lindgren's General Assembly report from 2 years ago to see all of the deferred maintenance and expense that's around the corner, like a tidal wave. But I'm not saying that it's a tent because of that. I'm saying that this is the tent because it's the tent of the Israelites dwelling in the desert. We are in a tent because we are in the desert, with God's dwelling as a temporary shelter, not yet in the promised land that God has appointed to us, where His dwelling place gains permanence. We must not look at the comfort of this building and the uncertainty that lies ahead and have that prevent us from crossing over. This is the point of everything that I'm saying. The miracles that have taken place in this last year are assigned to us. They're like the parting of the Jordan River, like the walls of Jericho tumbling down. God has handed us this promised land, and the land upon which He desires to build His temple. We must enter the land and begin sanctifying it now. If we do not cross over and instead choose to wait on the shores of the river, then we have failed to see the miraculous parting of the waters that has occurred in these recent months. Don't be fearful and apprehensive. We are not building God's temple. He is building His temple through us. Do not doubt that the miracles, small and great, will continue. Our path is being provided by the Lord. We must move forward with this property. We must begin sanctifying the ground upon which the temple will be built by celebrating the divine services there now. Long before we move out of this building, we can start sanctifying that property this week, next week. I don't know how all of this is going to happen when we leave this property. This is where you come in. You have a mansion, a barn, and a literal tent from St. Anna's. There are already many good ideas floating around. One is to rent or buy modular buildings for our worship space, which we can sell again in the future. Another is to build an inexpensive metal building to worship in. Another is to worship on Sundays at a rented location to save the expense. Another is to worship in the tent that we've just received. I'm sure you can all come up with more ideas. I'm here to state the goal. How we achieve this is up to you. In the meantime, here in this building, start to look at it as a tent. What we cannot do is to stand in the desert looking across the Jordan River at the promised land and wait. I tell you that God himself has parted these waters, has shown through these miracles in recent times. We must cross the dry riverbed in faith, knowing that God who has brought us to this shore is the same God who will guide us up the mountains, financial, logistical, and otherwise, to the Jerusalem on high, so that we can complete the task that he has always desired for us. God has already made the impossible possible. Don't forget that. He's made the impossible possible. So when our future looks impossible, remember that it always has and always will, until and unless we look with the eyes of faith. I want to leave you with the lyrics of a Greek folk song called Faith, which is translated by the monastery in Goldendale. And this was in the bulletin a few weeks ago, if you happen to look. Faith isn't when you wait for a grain of wheat to grow into a harvest, and from fruitless trees you grafted, you wait for fruitful blossoms to spring forth. Faith is when dry and barren earth and a dry tree burned by lightning, from these you are expecting fresh fruits to blossom. Faith isn't when, as the birds begin to sing at dawn, you wait to see a cheerful sun appear. Faith is when, knowing how illogical and false your mind seems to see it, you await the sun to rise at midnight and bright stars to appear at midday. Faith isn't proven when you count on your judgment and knowledge. Faith is true when it's founded or isn't true when it's founded or based on the rational or logical. Faith is when, if a dream seems impossible, you know and wait to see the miracle. My dearly beloved sisters and brothers in Christ, do not fear to cross the Jordan. Do not hold on to this tent that God has given us temporarily. Let us enter the promised land and begin the work of building a temple. If God is with us, who is against us? May he bless our work. I'll have Eric give an announcement now.
Right. Short one. A short announcement. We just want to get you a little information. As Father said, a whirlwind month.